I'm sure we all remember that infamous scene from episode 9 of House of the Dragon. No, not that one. That one, yes. The one that looks like it came straight out of season 8 of Game of Thrones. I remember going on Twitter after this episode dropped, and the amount of people furious that Rhaenys didn't say is so crazy. The sheer hatred that some people have for the Greens, how badly they want them to burn.
That whore of a queen murdered my brother and stole his throne, and you could have burnt more for it.
But what if they had? What if Rhaenys said the magic word and pruned, or shall I say singed off, a few branches of the Targaryen family tree? Would Westeros be a better place, or worse for it? Let's find out. So for this video, I'm going to try and make this one a bit more story-focused, with more drama and intrigue. Last time I did this, it was about Laenor being the father of strong boys, and what could have happened. It was fairly basic and straight to the point, but with this one, I'm actually going to try and craft a story for this alternate history. Things are going to change here, starting with Rhaenys, the queen who never was. Rhaenys was once in line for the Iron Throne. She was the only child of Prince Aemon Targaryen, the oldest living son of King Jaehaerys, the Conciliator. During the Council of 101, Rhaenys was passed over in favor of King Viserys, because she was a woman. In the show, Rhaenys makes it clear that she doesn't care about the throne, or who sits it. She's rid herself of the notion years ago. But just because she accepted the possibility of never sitting on the Iron Throne, doesn't mean it never affected her. She tells Corlys she rid herself of the notion, but what if that isn't entirely true? We see Rhaenys make some snarky comments to Rhaenyra in the beginning of the show, trying to knock her down a peg when she's named heir.
Whether it's to my daughter or to someone else's, your father will remarry, sooner than late. His new wife will produce new heirs, and chances are better than not that one of those will be male. And when that boy comes of age and your father has passed, the men of the realm will expect him to be heir, not you. Because that is the order of things.
It's clear that some part of her, on some level, is bitter about being looked over. And in this What If, we're going to amplify that bitterness, that darker part of Rhaenys. When Rhaenys bursts out of the dragon pit, she comes face to face with the Greens. Like in the show, Alicent steps in front of Aegon, and Rhaenys stares them down. But this time, it's different. It's said that the reason Rhaenys doesn't kill Alicent is because she doesn't want to kill another mother, but that's kinda BS, in my opinion, when she just killed a bunch of mothers when she burst out of the dragon pit. But moving on. This time is different. That sympathy isn't there. Rhaenys sees the crown on Aegon's head and thinks back to the Council of 101. That crown could have been mine, she thinks to herself, but they wouldn't let her have it. They chose Viserys. Rhaenys doesn't blame Viserys for what happened. He didn't have a choice in the matter, and neither did she. But still, some part of her feels like she was robbed. Robbed. The voice rings in her head. How many times had she been robbed? First it was the crown, and then it was her children, Laena and Laenor. Laena had died miles away in pain and fire. She couldn't save her. Laenor had been murdered, and she watched his burned body be pulled from the fire. Rhaenyra had killed him, or so she thought. Rhaenyra swore that she didn't kill her son, and on some level, she believed her. Why else would she agree to that marriage she proposed? Rhaenys knew what it was like to lose something, and the feelings of pain and resentment that came with it. For years, she stifled her feelings, her anger, for the sake of appearing strong, respectful, uncaring. But this time was different. Thieves, she thought. They're all thieves. How much more are you going to steal? Rhaenys glowers down at Alicent and Aegon. For so many years, decisions have been made for her. Decisions that cost her the things she loved the most. But now, for the first time in years, Rhaenys is the one with all the cards to play. All the power in the world to do what she pleases, what she thinks needs to be done. So she breathes, resolving herself, and with a shout she ends the war before it can even begin. Dracarys, she says, and Meleys rears her head. Alicent looks on, defeated, but accepting, as the flames wash over the Greens. Alicent, Aegon, Aemond, Helaena, Otto, Criston Cole, the Septon, even some of the guards present, all go up in flames. They don't even scream. Now, only ash remains. Well, that and the Conqueror's crown and sword, Blackfire. But there's no time to recover them. The doors are closing, and she needs to leave. As she does, the city begins to devolve into chaos. But Rhaenys can't do anything about it on her own. She started this after all, and might just make it worse. She spares a glance at the Red Keep, perhaps considering taking it for Rhaenyra, but that wouldn't be a good idea, unless she planned to burn it down. She was a dragon rider, not a warrior, and she didn't have an army to help her take it and keep it. Despite the Greens being dead, the castle was most likely still full of their supporters. They could be taken on with the proper reinforcements. So she heads to Dragonstone to inform Rhaenyra of what happened. When she gets there, she tells it simply. Your father is dead. I grieve the loss with you. He was a kind man. But there is more. The Greens took your crown. Aegon was crowned his successor, and Alicent demanded I declare for him. But I refused. Yet you are alive, Daemon says in return. Because they burned, Rhaenys responds, and there is silence. Rhaenys speaks again. Once the High Septon crowned Aegon in the Dragon Pit, I knew I could not let this transgression come to pass. They took your throne, so I took their lives. Though I couldn't take the city, Meleys alone wouldn't have been enough. The dead, Rhaenyra says, processing the information. You killed them all. I had no choice, Rhaenys responds. The revelation is shocking to Rhaenyra, and she can hardly believe what she's hearing. And like in the original show, she goes into labor early. It makes sense. She just got told her father died. Her brother took her throne. And then her cousin killed him, her sister, her other brother, best friend, and her best friend's father. It's a lot to take in all at once. Rhaenyra doesn't even know how to look at Rhaenys. She claims it was for the good of the realm, but she has a hard time believing that. They were traitors, but they were also family. She may not have been close with her half-siblings, but did they really deserve to die? Did Alicent deserve to die? Maybe they did, but maybe there could have been another way. They'll never know now. Rhaenyra begins going into labor, and Daemon immediately begins making battle plans. He feels no sympathy for the Greens, even if they were his brother's children. Traitors and usurpers were all they were. Blood meant nothing. Death was all they deserved for killing his brother and stealing his throne. At least, that's what he thinks they did. Like in the original, as Rhaenyra gives birth, or at least tries to, she calls for Daemon, but he doesn't come. Instead, he makes plans with Rhaenys and others to take the city. He wants to act fast and prevent any Green supporters from gaining a foothold. Even if Aegon, Helaena, Aemond, Alicent, and Otto are all dead, the Green bloodline has not been extinguished. Aegon and Helena's children, Jaehaerys and Jaehaera, are still alive because they weren't in the Dragon Pit, and as long as they remain so, people may rally to them. Then there's Daeron, the fourth child of Queen Alicent and Viserys, currently squiring for his cousin Ormond Hightower in Oldtown. It's recent, so the news of his family's death hasn't reached him yet, but it will eventually. Daemon wants to take the city, stop the word from spreading so they have control, much like Otto and Alicent did after the death of King Viserys. Like in the original, Rhaenyra demands they not make a move, and Jaehaerys delivers this message. But Daemon believes that this is the time to strike while the iron is hot. No one has the power to stop them. Daemon still has connections within the city, like the Gold Cloaks, and if those don't work out, he still has a dragon that is excellent for intimidation purposes. He's going to take the city, and Rhaenyra is effectively left alone on Dragonstone with her children. She gives birth to baby Visenya, who unfortunately does not make it, and now she has to bury her only daughter alone. Like in the original, Eric Cargyle appears to give Rhaenyra her crown during the funeral, but instead of Daemon placing the crown on Rhaenyra's head, it's Jace this time. So he kneels and calls his mother the queen. Time passes, and eventually Daemon sends word to Dragonstone that the city has been retaken, along with the Red Keep. Daemon used his fearsome dragon and connections to the City Watch to take control of King's Landing and secure the Red Keep with the help of Rhaenys. Rhaenyra and her children take flight for the capital. Corlys Velaryon, now awake at this time and informed of what happened, sails along with them for further support. When they get there, they find the Gold Cloaks manning the castle. Daemon is in the throne room. Rhaenyra is a bit cold towards Daemon when she sees him again, because he abandoned her when she needed him. She tells him about the stillbirth. It makes him upset, but he tries to hide it as he gives a report. They took the castle, freed the lords imprisoned by Otto. They tried capturing all the members of the Green Council, but only managed to get Jasper Wilde and Maester Orwyle. Tywin Lannister actually escaped during the chaos, and so did Larys Strong. But perhaps most importantly, when Daemon and Rhaenys took the city, Jaehaerys and Jaehaera, the two children of Aegon and Helaena, since Maelor probably hasn't been born and probably never will be now that Helena's dead, are nowhere to be found. They were spirited away from Rhaenyra's grasp. Daemon is in war mode right now. He says that the children need to be found and dealt with before anyone rallies to them. The same also goes for Daeron, currently in Oldtown. Even though it's slim, he's the only Green left with a somewhat fighting chance. Daeron has a dragon named Tessarion, the Blue Queen, who who is said to be fighting size and able to breathe blue flames, though that may not mean much at this point. The Blacks have Daeron vastly outnumbered. They have Cyrax, Caraxes, Meleys, Vermax, Arax, since Luke isn't dead this time, Moondancer, and with the death of Aegon, Helena, and Aemond, 3 dragons just opened up. Sunfire, Dreamfire, but most importantly, Vhagar, the largest dragon alive. The Blacks have 6 dragons at their disposal, but if Rhaena decides to claim a dragon on her own, they could soon have 7. She could claim Vhagar like she wanted to all those years ago, and just like that, the Blacks have a powerful new asset. But Rhaena is still inexperienced. Everyone has had dragons for years, unlike her. So if she claims Vhagar or any other dragon, how useful will she really be? Regardless, Daemon uses this information similarly to how he did in the original timeline.
The Greens have dragons.
They have
as
3
well.
adults, by my count. We have Cyrax, Caraxes, and Meleys. Your sons have Virmax, Arax, and Tyraxes. Baela has Moondancer. There are also unclaimed dragons. Seasmoke still resides on Driftmark. Vermithor and Silverwing dwell on the Dragon Mound. Still riderless. Then there are the 3 wild dragons, all of whom nest here. Dragonstone has 13 to their 4. Now, we need a place to gather, a toehold, large enough to house a sizable host. Here at Harrenhal, we cut off the west, surround King's Landing with the dragons, and we could have every greenhead mounted on spikes before the fucking moon turns.
But this time, instead of planning an attack on King's Landing, he wants to formulate an attack on Old Town. He wants no hope for a green resurgence, no safe haven for Aegon's children, no capital for Daeron's possible rebellion, since the High Towers will most certainly support Daeron once information reaches them. By ensuring the Green Line is extinguished, there will be no challenge to Rhaenyra's rule. It sounds smart, but Rhaenyra doesn't want to go through with this. Not just because she's still upset with Daemon for leaving her alone, but because she's mentally drained. In at most 48 hours, her father died, her throne was stolen, her siblings and best friend were all murdered. She has no time to grieve her father, feel frustrated over losing her crown, feel conflicted over the deaths of her brothers and sister, and best friend. She just had to bury her only daughter, alone. And now she's been crowned queen and is already being forced into politics, told that she has to kill the remainder of her family in order to prosper. Children, babies, like the one she just lost. No, Rhaenyra tells Daemon. She may not have been fond of her siblings, but they were still family, her father's children, usurpers or not. He wouldn't want them to die. But even if they were evil, Daeron, especially Jaehaerys and Jaehaera, were innocent. They weren't a part of this coup. What will the people think if I begin my reign bathed in the blood of children, she says. Who gives a fuck what they think, Daemon responds. You are the dragon, he tells her, like he told Viserys years ago, when he was exiled for defiling her. Let them fear you.
Who gives a fuck what some lord thinks? You are the dragon. Your word is truth and law.
Rhaenyra decides to continue the conversation in private. She sends everyone away so they can speak alone. Is this not enough? Rhaenyra responds. The city is in shambles. The usurpers are dead. Though it may have been Rhaenys who put them to the fire, I'm sure they think it was my hands that directed her. If they don't yet see me as a monster, I'm sure they will if I put the heads of my brother, niece, and nephew on spikes. The conversation they have mirrors what happens between Otto and Alicent after they caught Aegon. Daemon, like Otto, is a man capable of cold logic. The ends justify the means. Rhaenyra, like Alicent, is searching for another way that doesn't involve death.
Sacrifice. A sacrifice made for the stability of the realm. No king has ever lived that hasn't had to forfeit the lives of a few to protect the many, though I understand your squeamishness.
Reluctance to murder is not a weakness.
I am the queen, Rhaenyra states, with an exhausted authority, which irritates Daemon. She's making it clear that he doesn't have the say here, especially after she just had to bury their child alone. And we proceed as I see fit. Rhaenyra calls for a meeting with her supporters after this, and they begin to make plans. Corlys suggests that Rhaenyra have a public coronation as soon as possible. Right now, she looks more like a usurper than her brother does, and it's important that they get control of her narrative before things spread too far. Right now, because of the chaos Rhaenys caused, Daemon taking the city and Rhaenyra arriving to take the throne hours later, this whole thing seems planned. A vicious, remorseless assault and murder of one's kin. Even though Viserys named her heir, that was 20 years ago. Most of these people are dead now. And in the Dragon Pit, Otto said Viserys named Aegon his heir on his deathbed. Rhaenys was a witness to that before she went on a killing spree, so they begin making plans for that and rebuilding the small council. Corlys Velaryon is made Hand of the Queen here, and the other positions will most likely be filled by Rhaenyra supporters on Dragonstone and the Lords Otto kept prisoner. Jasper Wilde and Maester Orwell are kept in black cells though, they can't be trusted. Rhaenyra also starts drawing up terms for Daeron. Even if they lock down the city to prevent word from spreading about what happened, eventually he will find out about the death of his family. It's better the words come from Rhaenyra than some passing stranger. She hopes some kind of peace will be found and he won't try anything. Jacaerys, like in the original, says that they should deliver the message on Dragonback, but Rhaenyra refuses. If things go wrong, which is more than likely, she won't want anyone to be at risk, not even Daeron. She won't even consider sending Daemon because what if he just kills him without reading him his rights first? So this time she just lets the Raven do its job, to do the talking and avoid any problems. Speaking of problems, there is Rhaenys. Rhaenys killed Aegon, Helaena, Aemond, Alicent, Otto, Criston Cole, and hundreds, if not thousands, of other people. Rhaenyra has been keeping her at arm's length ever since she got the news of her family's death. Usually, Targaryens go unpunished for whatever slights they commit, big or small, and what Rhaenys did is a pretty big thing. She's a mass murderer, a mass kinslayer, which is one of the most heinous crimes in Westeros, and having her around unpunished could spell problems for her. Even if she did what she did for the good of everyone, it still has negative effects on Rhaenyra's image, so she has to do something. She's not going to kill Rhaenys because she could risk losing the Velaryons, but she can't do nothing lest people become more unsatisfied with her. So I'd say Rhaenys is given a soft exile. She's not forced to leave the continent, but she is essentially banned from King's Landing, kind of like Daemon was years ago, even though he just came back later on. But we'll see how that goes. She's sent back to Driftmark with Meleys for the time being. Later, however, Daeron does find out about what happened in King's Landing from Tywin Lannister and Larys Strong, who have arrived with his niece and nephew, Jaehaerys and Jaehaera. Naturally, Daeron is pissed and sad. His mother, brothers, sister, grandfather have all been murdered in what seems to be cold blood. After, to his knowledge, might I add, Viserys named Aegon the heir. Daeron, like his siblings, was taught that Rhaenyra's children were bastards, that Rhaenyra herself was not to be trusted, and now it seems like his mother's fears are more true than ever. So when word arrives in Old Town from Rhaenyra herself, he takes it with a grain of salt. She tells him to come back to King's Landing, bend the knee, and he will be safe. Jaehaerys and Jaehaera, if they are with him, will not be harmed. Jaehaerys will be made into a squire for one of her sons, or perhaps Daemon, and Jaehaera would be her cupbearer. The terms are similar to what Otto presented Rhaenyra with in episode 10.
Your sons by Prince Daemon will also be given places of high honor at court. Aegon the Younger as the king's squire, Viserys as his cupbearer. Finally, the king in his good grace will pardon any knight or lord who conspired against his ascent.
So now, Daeron has a few choices. He could stand in rebellion and push for his nephew's claim to the throne, though people may have a hard time rallying behind a child who doesn't even know what a throne is. Daeron could declare himself the rightful heir and still rebel, or he could do the smart thing and surrender. Rhaenyra at the moment has all the cards. She has the capital, the crown, the Velaryon fleet, but most importantly, dragons. It doesn't matter how big of an army you have if 7 dragons are facing you down and you only have 1. The easiest thing would be for Daeron to surrender, but he doesn't want to, and I'm the one with the controller here. Why would he want to surrender to Rhaenyra? She just slaughtered his entire family, their family. Now she expects his loyalty and obedience? He wants vengeance, justice, kind of like Rhaenyra at the end of Season 1 when Luke died. Though this time, he's alive and his death was replaced with that of the Greens. Still, despite this thirst for retribution, Daeron knows this may be unrealistic. He's around 15 to 16 years old at this time, but he's not an idiot. The gravity of the situation is clear, and I wouldn't even be surprised if he has a breakdown trying to weigh his options. Imagine being a teenager visiting your extended family, then finding out your father died and your half-sister seemingly planned the public murder and execution of your mother, grandfather, older brothers, and sister. She made you and your brother's children orphans in one day. Now, before you can even process the grief and rage properly, she demands that you swear your undying allegiance and offer up the last of your family as glorified hostages. But even then, if he does what she says, his death and the death of his nephew and niece are still on the table. This could very well just be a trap set by the Blacks to end the Green Line entirely. So what is the young Daeron to do? It's not a fun position to be in at such a young age. So for this what if, I have two possible scenarios for what can happen in mind. Scenario 1 will be pretty straightforward, like my Laenor being the father of the Strong Boys what if. Scenario 2 will be more complex and arguably entertaining as I pull out my trusty author's pen and spice things up a bit. What ifs and stories in general are like choose your own adventure kind of things. Anything can happen. I can say a meteor hits Westeros because Rhaenys killed the Greens and everyone else dies. But that's no fun, and that's what we're here for, and I'm going to do my best to make it make sense. So, moving on to scenario 1. Daeron surrenders. Daeron is logical. He knows he doesn't have a chance like this. Tessarion can't compete with potentially 7 dragons in an all-out battle. So he decides it's better to just live on his knees. At least he could be safe. Maybe he can bide his time, and one day the gods will give him justice. So he mounts Tessarion with Jaehaerys and Jaehaera and goes to King's Landing. He surrenders, kneels before Rhaenyra, and acknowledges her as his queen, swearing to never raise blades, banners, or dragonfire against her or her heirs. Daeron is allowed to live in peace, most likely in the safety of Old Town. Jaehaerys and Jaehaera are kept in the capital as a squire and cupbearer. Hostages, swords to be held over Daeron's head should he act out of line. Daeron lives his life in solitude, unable to avenge his family. He's even styled Daeron the Blue, not because of the Blue Queen Tessarion, but because he's always sad and miserable. Later, he tries to drown his sorrows in alcohol, and also comes to be known as Daeron the Drunken, like King Aegon V's brother. Daeron may potentially get married, probably to a Hightower cousin of his, since cousin-to-cousin marriage is actually normal in Westeros. Tywin Lannister's wife, Joanna Lannister, was actually his first cousin, by the way. Or perhaps he'll marry someone else. He's still a prince and a dragon rider, which means his children have dragon blood. So he's still useful despite being so somber. This could mean a future conflict later on between Daeron's descendants and Rhaenyra's. You may be thinking, how? Rhaenyra and Daemon would try their best to make sure his children couldn't get their hands on dragons so he could rise up against them. Well, I'll say this. Tessarion is called the Blue Queen for a reason. She's a she-dragon, so it's entirely possible she could lay eggs that could hatch later on and be used. I highly doubt they'll just confiscate her from Daeron or something like that. But also, if Jaehaerys and Jaehaera live, and assuming they don't marry within Rhaenyra's family, they could also have children of their own one day, and be a part of this potential conflict too. After all, who wants to serve the family that killed theirs? And now with Jaehaerys and his sister being of age, they'd have a fighting chance too. Their dragons, which were hatchlings at the start of the dance, would be of fighting size after all these years. Jaehaerys would look more like a challenger and potential king now, so possibly with the help of his uncle, potential cousins, and maybe even his sister, the dance could still happen. It wasn't averted, just temporarily delayed, but that's a story for a different time. On to scenario 2, where I break out my trusty author's pen. Daeron rebels. So after getting Rhaenyra's terms, Daeron kind of secludes himself to contemplate what he should do next, and with each passing hour, surrender seems to be the most viable option. Maybe he could live, maybe he could bide his time, or they could all die. This scene is going to mirror something that happened in the books. In the books, Aegon, like in the show, doesn't actually want to be king, but the crown isn't just forced on his head and then he's sent to some ceremony. Before that, he actually gets talked into taking the throne by Criston Cole, who is dead in this timeline. So Daeron gets that encouragement elsewhere. As he weighs his options, his Hightower relatives and his cousin Ormond Hightower tell him that he has to take up arms. They're angry that Rhaenyra, a kinslayer, murderer, and mother of bastards, killed Otto, Alicent, and her children. Mad that she robbed Daeron and Aegon's children of their birthright. It's a lot of anger and frustration, and it makes him even more stressed. But he finds some solace in Larys Strong. Larys is a mysterious character both in show and book. He's very much a self-serving man, and his motivations and desires are unclear. But what is clear is that Larys knows how to worm his way in. It's easy to get in with Daeron, just like it was to get in with Alicent. Alicent had no one. She was alone, isolated in King's Landing, and afraid. Daeron is the same, a child whose family was just killed. He's surrounded by people, but still feels alone. There's a weight on his shoulders that they cannot understand. So to make Daeron feel more at ease, he doesn't try to fuel him with anger. He instead talks with him, talks about his family, his father, his brother, the pressure he felt to live up to them and their legacy while he was so deformed. It's all an act to let his guard down. Larys doesn't really care about family. He killed his own father and brother, then offered to cut out his own nephew's eye. Even so, there is inspiration to be found in what Larys says to Daeron. Many tasks are daunting, he says, but we must dare to overcome them all the same. But how can he? Daeron wonders. If he were to stand against Rhaenyra, who would support him? Support Jaehaerys? Jaehaerys is a boy. You are a man, and a boy cannot lead. He doesn't even know he's been robbed. But when he's older, all he will know is you and what you've done for him. What can I do? Daeron asks. There are many ways to win a war, young prince. Physicality, armies are just one side of the coin. Whispers the other. Even whispers can stoke a fire as bold as a dragon's. Yes, whispers and fire. Larys says, and a plan forms. Daeron finds resolve to fight against Rhaenyra, proclaiming himself the rightful heir to the Iron Throne, as he is the only one with the power to take it back. But despite finding his feet, he still knows he's outmatched. He needs allies, soldiers, ships. And when it comes to that, Tywin Lannister, the master of ships, who no longer has any ships to master, has two ideas in mind for potential alliances. The first being the Greyjoys. The Greyjoys are ruthless warriors. They have ships. Daeron could use them, but the problem with the Greyjoys is that they're too hard to control. At this current time, the Greyjoys are led by a man known as Dalton Greyjoy, the Red Kraken. Dalton lives for battle. It's said he rowed ships at age 5, reeved and raided since he was 10 with his uncle. He fought on the Stepstones, and it's said that at age 15, he avenged the death of his uncle. He rose from the conflict bleeding from 100 wounds, and that's how he became the Red Kraken. Dalton is like the Ivar the Boneless of the Ironborn. This guy inspires awe and terror, living for battle and his own desires. This is who the Ironborn in OG Game of Thrones wish that they were, though his exploits are probably exaggerated, and while he may be a great warrior, I doubt he's actually Viking Jesus or something like that. But we'll see how the show handles him later on. Either way, the Greyjoys could be a very valuable asset, but you need to be careful when you let the genie out of the bottle. The Greyjoys could be more risk than reward, but they are not the only option. Tywin's brother, Jason. The Lannisters are still one of the wealthiest houses in the realm. They have ships, they have soldiers, and they have gold. Tywin can broker something between them since Jason is his twin brother, but it's going to take more than that to convince him. This is not to say Jason is loyal to Rhaenyra. In fact, I'm sure he would gladly support Daeron after being pushed aside and embarrassed by both Viserys and Rhaenyra all those years ago. He's a prideful man, like most Lannisters are, but I don't think he's stupid. Rhaenyra has a lot of dragons on her side, so he's going to need some serious incentive to support Daeron, who only has one. Well, technically he has 3, since Jaehaerys and Jaehaera also have dragons, but they're hatchlings, practically useless in a fight. Targaryen is the only one worth something right now. So Daeron decides to take a chance, and flies to Casterly Rock to treat with Lord Jason Lannister, and they go over what I've already mentioned about how risky this is. Daeron calls Rhaenyra a kinslayer, a craven coward. They are bound by honor and duty to depose her, but he knows that honor and duty may not be enough to sway him to risk his life and that of his family. So he makes Jason an offer. If honor, duty, and decency are not enough, maybe blood is. Family. A marriage pact. The most common and effective way to gain support in Westeros most of the time. Jason Lannister actually has a few daughters, 2 of which are named, Tyshaera and Sorel. Those will be our 2 candidates, and it's actually more enticing to Jason than you may think. The Lannisters have always wanted dragons. Years ago, before Rhaenyra and Aegon, Rhaena Targaryen, the granddaughter of Aegon the Conqueror, stayed at Casterly Rock for a time. While she was there, the Lannisters at the time did everything they could to get her to stay and give them dragons, or dragon eggs. This ambition clearly passed on to Jason, since in episode 3 he says they have the funds to make their own dragon pit in Casterly Rock. Now, Daeron is offering him that chance. Should he win against Rhaenyra, his brother will be on the small council, his daughter would be royalty, his grandchildren would be royalty, and more importantly, should those children marry back into the family, there may be dragon riders with the name Lannister, not Targaryen or Velaryon. This proposition strokes his ego something fierce, and he agrees to the marriage. We'll say Daeron gets engaged to Tyshaera Lannister. We don't know how old she is exactly, but we'll say she's around the same age as Daeron, maybe older by a few years. Either way, Daeron has a wife and a chance to further his line. This event is known as the Blue Wedding because Daeron is the blue dragon with the blue queen Tessarion. Word of this does end up getting back to Rhaenyra, however, but the details are lost to her. She doesn't know that Daeron is actually planning something yet. Daemon seemingly sees through this, though, and says they need to take care of Daeron now before he can sire any children and extend his family line. He wants to burn them and the Lannisters, preferably while they're all in one spot. Corlys also agrees that Daeron should be taken care of, but Rhaenyra also takes this with a grain of salt. Partly because she doesn't want to kill Daeron, partly because she's still upset with Daemon, but mostly she holds back because Daeron hasn't done anything to her yet. There are no talks about him rebelling. On the outside looking in, he just got married. His detailed talks with Jason were private. Even if she thought he was planning something, there's no proof, just suspicion. Unlike in the main timeline, no one's died on her side. Luke is still alive. There's no smoking gun. There's nothing and no one forcing her to act. No clear indicator that war is guaranteed. It may be suspicious that he hasn't responded to her terms yet, and he went and got married, but it's understandable to her because he thinks she killed his family. Their family. It's kind of like what happened with Rhaenys in the original show, how she doesn't really blame her for being angry because, she thinks she killed her son. But right now, things are in Rhaenyra's favor. She's the queen. She holds the capital. Does she want to risk starting a war that may not even be on the table? What would people say about her if she killed Daeron and the Lannisters for seemingly no reason? They'd call her a murderer, and the rumors spreading about her would be true. A kinslayer, a coward, a murderer, a Maegor with teats, which is actually what she's called in the books. Ever since Rhaenys took it upon herself to kill the Greens, people have begun to think it was planned, that Rhaenyra was behind the whole thing. She can say she wasn't behind it, she can say she was the rightful heir the entire time because her father named her as such, but as I mentioned before, Otto says the same thing about Aegon. Viserys named him the heir on his deathbed. The lords who knelt to Rhaenyra 20 years ago are pretty much dead, and she was only seen as a means to an end anyway. And in regards to Aegon being named, no one was there to witness that besides Alicent. And she's dead now. All the Greens are. So who's to say Viserys never changed his mind? It's not like they can admit to lying. Maybe he did name Aegon the heir, but he was too sick and died before he could make it public knowledge. Why wouldn't he trust his wife Alicent with this information before he passed? After all, Alicent was a good, righteous, dutiful woman who loved her husband, right? Rhaenyra is the one with bastards in line to inherit. Everyone knows, but says nothing. Sure, her father protected her, but like I said before, what if he changed his mind? What if that's why Rhaenyra left so early? Everyone knew she was in King's Landing and left the same night Viserys died. What if she had something to do with it? It's not that far-fetched after all. She killed her own husband to marry her uncle. At least, that's what she wanted people to believe. Right? But why would Rhaenys support a woman who killed her son? That's an easy answer. Power. Everyone witnessed it. The announcement of Baela and Rhaena being engaged to Luke and Jacaerys. It was a power move. Jacaerys would be king. Baela would be his queen. Luke would be Lord of the Tides with Rhaena by his side. The two most powerful families bonded together once again. All Rhaenys had to do was get rid of any competition. That's why she stayed behind. That's why she burned the Greens. It was power. It was greed. It was a narrative Larys knew anyone could believe. One whisper that could become 1,000. And now it was time for fire. And just so you guys know, this isn't all happening all at once. It's taking place over the span of weeks, months even. It's not immediate, not one after the other. It's taking its time. But moving on. At this point, Rhaenyra wants to consolidate her power as much as possible for the moment and make things more secure. So after some time, she makes her children's betrothals full-blown marriages. Jacaerys weds Baela, Lucerys weds Rhaena, who is now the Rider of Vhagar. Her small council has been rebuilt, and so has the King's Guard, though in this case I suppose I should call it the Queen's Guard, the first in its history with Steffon Darklyn as Lord Commander. Things are looking up for the Blacks. They've reclaimed Aegon's crown and the sword Blackfyre. Rhaenyra wields his sword, but she's not a warrior. It's just a decoration that adds to her legitimacy, like the crown in a way. People are still whispering about her in the streets, though she's grown used to that by now. And every now and then she's counseled about Daeron and the threat he poses. Rumor has it that now his wife Tyshaera is with child. For a while, Rhaenyra has been using Daemon's logic against him and is kind of dismissive of the issue, and you can't really blame her. Daeron could have all the soldiers he wants, all the children he wants, Even with the proper dragon-killing equipment, Rhaenyra has 7 dragons that would go to war for her. Meeting them in an open field with only Tessarion would be a bad idea for Daeron, and even if he has kids, it will be years before they could ever pose a threat. In a way, she's kind of acting like Viserys. She's gotten comfortable, thinks she's untouchable, and who wouldn't with an army of dragons at their beck and call? There is no chance for a war in her eyes, at least not one that they stand to lose. But as Larys said a while ago, there are more ways to win a war. Whispers and fire. So one night, when the castle is quiet, Larys sets about the second part of his plan. We'll assume he still has connections in the city, aka his fireflies, and he actually knows about the secret passageways in the Red Keep. It's through these that his fireflies actually managed to infiltrate the castle unseen. Alicent, Otto, Aegon, Aemon, Helena, Kristen Cole, they all had to face the fire. And now, so would they. So the Red Keep is set ablaze, like Harrenhal was. There is confusion and chaos since no one knows how the fire started. It's spreading fast and also very hard to breathe because of the smoke. Some doors in the palace are actually locked and some people are trapped in rooms. As the castle stirs and becomes fully aware of what's going on, people work frantically to put out the flames, and among them is Jacaerys. Jacaerys goes around helping people, lifting them up and even carrying them to safety if he has to. He's issuing orders to who he can to help put out the fire, and in this moment he shines as a leader, giving support, direction, and not cowering away in the face of adversity. He is indeed a strong king in the making. Lucerys and Rhaena manage to escape the fire relatively unharmed, and later on, Daemon comes out with Rhaenyra, who is looking dreadful. She's coughing, covered in soot. Her room was one of the ones that was locked, but with the help of Daemon, she managed to escape. This goes a ways to mending their relationship. But during this ordeal, Jacaerys can't find Baela, or his younger brothers, Aegon and Viserys. He and Daemon go back inside to find them and ultimately get separated. While he searches for Baela, he actually sees one of the fireflies setting another fire and leaving the scene of the crime. Jacaerys goes after him, but before he can catch him, he hears Baela. She's locked in a room with Aegon and Viserys, and the fire is spreading. Immediately, Jacaerys tries to open the door, but it's locked. Too hot. So he throws his body against it, trying to break it down and get to Baela and his brothers. The scene mirrors what happens with Lionel Strong and Harwin Strong, how the fires spread over Harrenhal, and despite all their strength, they couldn't escape. They were not strong enough. But this is different. Jacaerys is the blood of the dragon. Fire is in his very veins. It's his strength, and he won't let his family be consumed by it. It seems like a hopeless effort, but Jacaerys is relentless and manages to break down the door, but at the cost of his body. Jacaerys ends up severely burned, getting to Baela and the children. It's only when Daemon finds them are they able to truly escape. Eventually, after that, the fire is put out. But the keep is worse for wear, and it's far from a happy time. People are dead. Guards, servants, lords, prisoners. Jasper Wilde and Maester Orwell, who are still imprisoned at this point, are now dead. Jacaerys is wounded and will be permanently scarred. And perhaps worst of all, during this fire, Corlys Velaryon actually died. Corlys, at least in the books, is pushing 70 years old. So with the smoke inhalation, the heat, the strain was just too much on his old body. But maybe we can say he died for a purpose. Perhaps he helped Rhaena and Lucerys escape, something which Lucerys now feels guilty for. And it doesn't help that with the death of the Sea Snake, Luke is now officially the Lord of the Tides. Everyone is left confused and disoriented for the time being. No one knows how the fire started. Jacaerys is the only one who saw something, but after his injuries, he's too addled on milk of the poppy to actually say anything about what he saw. Everyone is reeling with the death of Corlys. Rhaenys needs to be informed, a funeral needs to take place, and Luke needs to take his place as the Lord of the Tides. And as all of this takes place, Daeron begins to devise a plan to be rid of the Blacks for good. It's a risky one though, and if it fails, the Blacks will most likely come after him. So with that in mind, he needs to prepare himself for war. Daeron can have as many alliances and soldiers as he wants, but he's missing one crucial thing. Dragons. Dragons beat armies almost every time. Daeron has 1 dragon. Rhaenyra has 7. 6 of which that are actually combat ready since Jacaerys is out of commission and won't be riding Vermax anytime soon. He is outnumbered, but there is a way to rectify this so sneak attacks and assassination attempts aren't his only options for victory. And I can do this in a way that actually makes sense. The answer lies on Driftmark. With Corlys dead and Lucerys now being Lord of the Tides, You'd think everything would be fine since Vaemon was the only person who seemed to care that Driftmark was being passed on to a bastard, right? Wrong. In the books, Vaemon actually isn't the only Velaryon who isn't happy about the succession. In the books, Vaemon actually has a family. He has a wife and 2 sons, Daeron and Damian. Yes, these Valyrian names are very original. And in the books, Vaemon's sons, along with 5 of his cousins, go to King's Landing after his death to get justice and put their own claims forward for Driftmark. Viserys is still alive at this point and refuses. Daeron and Damian take it on the chin, but their cousins don't. These 5 cousins echo Vaemon's thoughts about Rhaenyra's children being bastards. As a result, they have their tongues cut out, and are henceforth known as the Silent Five. Daeron and Damian, the sons of Vaemon, who didn't end up losing their tongues, eventually reconcile with the Blacks, but the Silent Five do not. They side with Aegon during the war, feeling resentful to Daemon and Rhaenyra. I believe this stays the same in this timeline. Now, we don't see them in the show, but that doesn't mean they don't exist. We may see them in Season 2, and Daemon may cut out their tongues for talking down to Rhaenyra, who knows. But in this What If, going by show logic, they aren't there when Daemon kills Vaemon, but the Silent Five are still pissed about it nonetheless, and they know they won't get any justice here. Once the Greens die in this timeline and Rhaenyra takes over, and then Corlys dies and Luke rises to power, they know they have no hope of getting Driftmark. She's Luke's mother, and will always favor her son. Hope seems lost, but after hearing some rumors and worries that Daeron could potentially rebel, they see an opportunity to claim what's theirs by right. So after a funeral service for Corlys, led by Vaemon's sons Daeron and Damian, they leave and seek out Rhaenyra's half-brother, and pledge their loyalty to him if he rises up against Rhaenyra. Daeron accepts this on one condition. They need to claim a dragon. Now this may sound like bullshit, but I promise it makes sense. I believe I mentioned this before in my How Valid Are the Strong Boys Claims video, that there technically is no such thing as a pure Targaryen. House Targaryen and Velaryon have intermarried for centuries. Aegon the Conqueror's mother was a Velaryon. Rhaenys Targaryen's wife was a Velaryon. The families intermarried long before the Iron Throne was even a thing, and in the books the families were nigh indistinguishable from one another. Though in the show that's different because the Velaryons are now black. But assuming the lore of the families has not changed, there's still Velaryon blood in every Targaryen, and Targaryen blood in every Velaryon. Maybe some more than others, but it's still there. It's possible. So with this knowledge in mind, the Silent Five set out to claim riderless dragons. They go to Dragonstone, where most of the wild dragons are, and they are partially successful. 2 of the 5 die trying to claim a dragon called the Cannibal. The Cannibal, as his name states, is a dragon that eats other dragons, and sometimes people. He's one of the 3 wild dragons Daemon references in the show. Wild dragons are different from your typical riderless dragon. These are dragons who have never had a rider, so you can imagine that they don't like being told what to do. But other dragons on Dragonstone, like Vermithor and Silverwing, the dragons of Old King Jaehaerys and Queen Alysanne, they're different, and so they are claimed by 2 of the surviving 5. Now you may be wondering, well, what about the 3rd one? Well, the 3rd one is not on Dragonstone. He's actually going to Driftmark. Why? Because that's where Seasmoke is, without a rider. Laenor is gone. Everyone thinks he's dead. And for the sake of this What If, I'm going to use my trusty author spin to say he actually is dead in this timeline. This allows the last brother to claim Seasmoke. Now Daeron has 4 dragons to Rhaenyra's 7. She still outnumbers him, but he has more of a fighting chance now, even if his second plan ends up failing. But what is the second plan that I keep talking about? Well, that plan is Auric Cargyle, the twin brother to Eric Cargyle, the guy who brought Rhaenyra her crown. They're identical twins. Alicent couldn't even tell them apart. Both of them are still alive as well, and if you can't tell one from the other, how can you be so sure that their blade is meant to defend you or harm you? By sneaking into the Red Keep and hiding in plain sight, Daeron intends to have Auric wipe out the Blacks as retribution and justice for his slain family. It's a risky plan if he gets caught, but will he succeed? You'll have to find out next time, because I'm ending the video here. This was very long-winded and probably the longest video I have done to date. So if you stuck around this long, I really appreciate you. I really had fun with this, making this What If and fleshing out the narrative a bit more so we have a nice juicy little conflict. I will definitely do more of these, and I hope you guys enjoy watching them as I enjoy making them. So don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, tell me what you thought in the comments, and I will see you all next time.